Good afternoon, everyone. This is Nevin, your host of New Ideas. With me is my recurring guest and good friend of the show, Dr. Pat Choate, who is an economist, a former vice presidential candidate, and his running mate, Ross Perot, the famous billionaire business person and American nationalist. During the 1996 election, Mr. Choate, or Pat, we'll call him, has been a consultant for decades for various local state governments, as well as the federal government, a number of private corporations. He's a prolific author of excellent books such as Saving Capitalism and Dangerous Business and Agents of Influence. I have those three books in my bookshelf in my library in the next room over there. Pat has the honor of really changing my mind about neoliberalism. I used to be an adherent of neoliberalism. I bought into Reaganomics. In fact, I thought that Reaganomics was too statist, and I was even more libertarian once upon a time. But I started to change my mind because of the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, the deindustrialization of the greater New York City area, where I'm from, as well as the inconsistencies within Republican Party and even conservative policies towards our geopolitical adversaries. And it made me rethink, and I wanted to find answers. And I came across Pat's works, Dangerous Business and Saving Capitalism, his interviews at the New America Foundation with Michael Lind and others, Ralph Gomery and others. And it really he was one of the leading intellectuals that have changed my mind. And with me is Pat, for probably the fifth or sixth show that we've had and many more. How you doing today?
I'm doing well. I've always enjoyed our discussions. They're fun.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Likewise. Well, it's an honor to have you. It's an honor to have a good professional working relationship and friendship here. And there's been there's so much in the news nowadays, as you know, and one of the biggest items that's rather controversial is the big, beautiful bill, as it's nicknamed, which is the new spending and tax plan of the Trump administration. You have within the Republican Party, you have the Freedom Caucus and the hardcore libertarian elements that believe that taxes are not cut enough and spending is not cut enough. They basically want to destroy the positive aspects of the New Deal and the Great Society. On the other hand, you have the Trump-aligned Republicans who want the cutbacks, but there's going to be, as a result, deficit spending because not enough revenue will be raised. And that's the sort of typical supply side tax plans that have been a hallmark of Republican presidential policies since at least the early 1980s. And, personally, I want to understand what happened and why the Keynesians, or if you want to call them the believers in demand side economics or that type of capitalism, lost the battle versus the supply siders, the monetarists led by Milton Friedman and other more or less free market fundamentalists, why they gained the upper hand. Now, this is my impression, and then I'll let you take off. My impression is that the advocates of demand side economics, that type of capitalism, really did not defend their case adequately. While the advocates of market fundamentalism, even by the admission of Milton Friedman, basically exploited a situation, a crisis, and they ran with it. And they had very good messaging. They had quite a bit of funding. They were highly organized and disciplined. And they basically took over the store. They promised a lot and delivered mediocre results for working class people, small businesses, national industries that are rooted in the country, as well as poor people and needy people. And that's my impression. So, Pat, could you tell us the origins of supply side economics? And you were there during these battles.
Yes.
What actually...
I was part of them.
Yeah. What actually, exactly, Is my interpretation correct, or is there more to the story? I think the listeners and myself would really like to hear a deep, granular history of just what happened.
Okay, let's analyze it, but let's do it from a somewhat different context here. We wind up with orthodox economics. They'll do it in the context of a Keynesian theory, a supply side theory, etc. But let's step back. Let's use in economics what is called an institutional economics framework. So let's back off and let's make the first division as we're thinking about. Let's just analyze where we are. So the first division that we need to make is between macroeconomics and microeconomics. All of these questions that you laid out are questions of macroeconomics. Now, the other context that we need to address are the institutions by which we deal with macroeconomics. So it is the Congress, it is the courts, it's the presidency, it's our federal government, it is our financial market, it is our religious beliefs, it's our cultures, it's our laws that speak towards the individual freedoms. It's the culture of law that has enforceable contracts. Capitalism is based on the premise of free markets and enforceable contracts. So we have that. Now, in the macro side of the equation, you've got just a limited number of tools that you can use. You can use fiscal policy, in other words, the spending, the demand side. You can use your tax policy, both the levels and the incident, where you've got your exchange rate policies. You can influence trade by the rate that you exchange the value of the dollar against other currencies. You've got your intellectual property tools on the technology, and then you've got your trade policy. That's it. Those are those. So the question that we really come to is, what kind of combination of these tools do we have, and what is the objective of the use of these tools? Well, the basic objective boils down in a capitalist society to that of choosing between, do you focus on equity, in other words, the division of who gets what from a productive society, or do you focus on efficiency, in other words, trying to make maximum use of all of these assets, and then what sort of a balance that you have in between. And there's a great book on this, published in 1975 by Arthur Occam, O-K-U-M, and it's called The Great Trade-Off Between Equity and Efficiency. And we see this playing itself out in three different eras inside our society. The first was with Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt took on the robber barons of the Gilded Age, the J.P. Morgans of our time. The robber barons in the post-World War, post-Civil War era really built a great industrial nations. They built the railroads, they built the steel, they built the factories, etc. And the controllers of wealth focused on efficiency, getting the absolute most out of it, squeezing every last hour for as little money as you could from the workers, abusing the resources, using the government to give private advantage through public means, etc. And Roosevelt began the process of breaking that up when he became a trust buster and broke that up. After Roosevelt left, you had a small continuation of that with Woodrow Wilson, and but that era ended with Warren G. Harding, and so you had the Teddy Roosevelt era. That's the first of that. Then we wound up going back to the 19th century, focusing on efficiency, getting the most out of the resources, giving as little to equity to the sharing the benefits in the 1920s, and we wound up with the Great Depression. And the Great Depression occurred, by the way, not because of tariffs. It's because the Federal Reserve, which had been created in 2013, had never had a crisis, and they totally bungled the money supply.
Mm-hmm.
And Andrew Mellon, as secretary, head of Alcoa and Gulf Oil, the Mellon Bank, etc., hard money guy, he cut the money supply 1/3. I guarantee you, you cut the money supply 1/3 on the U.S. right now, and we'll have another Great Depression as such. It was just a bungling of it. But so then you entered the New Deal and Roosevelt, and that really extended up until the Ronald Reagan era. So the focus was on efficiency. On equity. It was to balance the scale towards equity. And so you had high marginal tax rates. You really had balanced budgets, except in World War II. You wound up with a dynamic in which, by the time Jimmy Carter took over, and Carter was the last of the New Deal presidents, when he left office, we had financed World War I, World War II, building the interstate highway system, GI Bill, educating millions of soldiers, having the most dynamic economy in the world, putting a person on the moon, which we still can't do right now. And we did all that, and our national debt was something like $997 billion. When Jimmy Carter left office, the national debt was less than $1 trillion. It's 37 trillion today, but that was the end of it. Now you came into the Reagan era, and basically it was Jack Kemp and Arthur Lafler, the economist, and they argued that the way to advance the economy and meet the challenges that we were experiencing out of Europe, Germany being revitalized, Japan, and out of Asia, is literally to go back and emphasize efficiency. And the way that you do that is you reduce the taxes on the wealthy who have more resources put back into investment, and you encourage them by taking less of that their returns away. And so we have had the supply side era, the Reagan era, and it continues right up today. What Trump is doing is an exaggerated version of that, saying, okay, let's cut Medicare, let's cut $500 billion of Medicare, let's cut food stamps and SNAP, etc., and let's shift these resources over to the super wealthy, who we anticipate will take that money, invest it back in society, etc. So the conflict that you're seeing right now is between an inarticulate Democratic Party that does not have a set of objectives and the tail end of the Reagan Revolution with a supply side agenda. So the question is, and looking forward on this thing, is what do we do? We're in a situation now where Europe has a larger economy collectively than the United States, the EU, and more people. You have China that in a period of less than 30 years has gone from 4% to about 30% of the world's manufacturing. We had a debate in the 1980s in the early part of the 1990s that got concluded in the Clinton administration and H.B. Bush administration, about that we were not going to do industrial policies in this country while other countries were doing it. And what we have seen is the rise of state capitalism in China. 90% of all of the export industries in China are really owned by the state. They'll make distributions, but those are state enterprises. For example, in their China 2025, which was their 10-year program, they identified specific industries that they were going to dominate worldwide. Electric vehicles, solar panels, wind, rare earths, the 17 rare earths. They were going to totally dominate that. And any private companies in Germany or the US that went into it, the Chinese would just subsidize and dump those goods. They did this in the 70s, 80s, and 90s with textiles and apparel, for example. Literally a major company like Milliken and Company, a major textile company, the Chinese, because of their subsidies, were able to deliver their product in American stores for less than the cost of the materials that Milliken had to pay before they processed them. And it was because of the Chinese subsidies. And so now we find ourselves in this situation, and our dependencies and our imbalance have become clear. And one of the things I think that we both got to give credit and criticism to is Donald Trump. Donald Trump has identified the major economic problem of our time, and that is these massive goods trade deficits. And the fact that we have this whole series of industries and minerals in which we are totally dependent. We're recording this on June 7th, 2025. And as of this day, the United States is in a conflict with China on trade policies. China, in April, suspended the export of 17 rare earths to the United States. Now seeing part of the auto industry closed down. We go another couple of months, we're going to see parts of the major parts of the electronics industry inside the United States go down. We began this period with a 6-month national security supply. What we're going to see in, I'd say, 4 to 6 months is we're not going to be able to produce the A-35 and a whole series of our military weapons. That's going to close down because we don't have the rare earths. And moreover, China not only has the location of 70% of the world's rare earths, they have the processing capacity on that of 90% of everything that we use. So China is literally flexing its muscle. It has a choke point on our economy. And they're using that choke point, and they're going to demand concessions from us on that. Now, fortunately, we have countervailing things to do. But most important, what Trump is doing, it's elucidating the message. The message is there's a certain number of industries. AI is one of those industries. Rare earths and certain minerals is another one of those. The telecommunications to go into the 6th generation of telecommunications, which the Chinese intend to dominate by 2035, and have said so very explicitly. Biologics on the medicines, fundamental components. We depend on China and India for 90% of the basics that we make our pharmaceuticals in. Mm-hmm. We don't have a single plant in the United States that makes penicillin at this point. Right. So now we're at a point is what we really need is a series of Manhattan level projects that are a top priority. And the goal here is resiliency of our economy, and to not have autarky on certain industries, but to have autonomy. And that we do this by developing it here, that we have relationships with friendly relationships with some other countries where we're autonomous. And we certainly need to break our dependency on our strategic opponents, Russia, China, and the countries within their spheres of influence. Our goal must be to break that as fast as we can do it. Now, then, if you say the question is, okay, what are our national security needs? What are our objectives? What do we need to do here? Yes, Biden did the right thing on the Semiconductor, the CHIPS Act. We absolutely must lead the world in that because of artificial intelligence. We must command artificial intelligence. And that means that we need to get energy to them. It means what Bill Gates is doing and what a couple of other companies are doing to have these 20-year portable nuclear plants that are super safe and that can mass produce quickly, get things like that in plan. Once you say that we need this coordinated, focused, Manhattan level building of resiliency there, then the question really becomes one of how do you use these tools? How do you use these macro tools to get what you want? Well, it says you got to have a stable dollar. And that means that you've got to be the reserve currency, which is a privilege that we have. It means that we got to crush crypto, which is an alternative financial system, unregulated, corrupt. It means that you need a monetary policy that keeps interest rates low, because basically you're going to need the capital, massive capital that you're going to have. It means on your fiscal policy, you've got to focus investments on your infrastructure, your basic infrastructure that we have. It means that we've got to keep our defenses up. We would be a target for other countries if we didn't have the world's strongest defense in the world as we go this transition. It means on our trade policy is that we've got to move away from this rules-based economic system that we put into place with NAFTA, China's ascension into the World Trade Organization and the World Trade Organization. It's got to be much more practical as such. We have tried to promote rules for every country, when in fact we have many countries, China notably, Russia as well, parts of Southeast Asia, the Vietnams, the Japan, that have a different culture and a different trading system. And so at that point, the issue is not about cutting the budget. It is not about levels of federal expenditure. It's not about simply having low taxes. It is to say we have a national challenge. We have a deadly opponent in Russia. We have a really smart, well-financed, focused opponent in China who has more people studying AI than we have in all of our colleges in all disciplines. Are formidable people. That's how we need to focus it. We need to focus it on the results that we want and recognize that the neoliberal model won't get us there, and realize, and it hadn't, it's deindustrialized it, and realize that the supply side agenda won't get it there. We've run up massive amounts of debt, and we take a look at it. What do we have left? We have an education system that is falling behind. We have an infrastructure that is in decay still, although we've known it. We have a military that needs to adapt to the kind of warfare that we're seeing happen in Ukraine. I mean, it's a totally new set of warfare. We're producing 100,000 drones a year right now, and Ukraine will produce 4 million this year. Russia will produce 4 million. We're set up for battle in the Vietnam era, World War II era. Our tanks are essentially becoming irrelevant. We need new strategies, new types of air defenses, a whole rethinking, which will cost a lot. So basically, that's my analysis of where we are on this. We really need some fresh thinking on both the political parties and in the public policy profession.
That's a great breakdown of everything. And trade is a big factor.
Yes.
The other big problem, and I've learned this in the last number of years, is also our domestic financialization and how that's pushed trade policy.
Yes.
And also malinvestment, I would argue, in the United States, leverage buyouts.
Yes.
Which is also known as private equity and mergers and acquisitions. That had, as well as the re-legalization of stock buybacks in 1982. And that has misallocated, I would argue, and others have argued this too, capital that could have been spent for opening new factories, hiring new people, new salaries, etc., into just inflating stock value, purely financial speculation, or at least a bad form of it. And I would argue that needs to be made illegal. Now, I would do it within, let's say, a 5-year period, so financial institutions don't suffer a debilitating shock. They have a time to reconfigure themselves, so to speak. I'm very kind of, quote, conservative or careful, but that those kinds of activities, frankly, need to be banned. Because we are in an economic emergency in regards to mining and manufacturing and other forms of self-sufficiency. Like you, I also do believe that we should trade with friendly and neutral nations, but we have to do it with eyes open, because even our allies engage for decades upon decades, longer than I've been alive, in unfair trade practices that are highly statist and not, quote, free market. We would trade based on what I term product quality, and not the things or measures that make those products artificially cheap, like the whole panoply of subsidies. The biggest challenge I think we're going to have is uprooting the supply side, which is a form of basically neoliberalism. It's really the same thing. It's basically, let me define neoliberalism. I know you know this, obviously, but for the audience, neoliberalism, as far as I'm concerned, or classical liberal economics as known today, has more than a trifecta. It's destruction of unions or deunionization, financialization, deindustrialization, deregulation, or I term even crony deregulation,
right,
as well as privatization of public services. That's very ideologically as well as interest group charged or motivated. That is neoliberalism. And that needs to be uprooted. And I think one of the biggest problems is that there are plenty of us running around that have programs that push policy papers, books for decades upon decades. But we are not as well financed. We are definitely not well entrenched in the political establishment. The neoliberals in both parties, and the Republican Party has been dominated by these forces for a very, very long time. And dislodging them is difficult. Grover Norquist, for those of you who don't know in the audience, is the founder of Americans for Tax Reform and is a prominent proponent of neoliberalism. He is very well entrenched. In fact, he had a phone call with Donald Trump about tax policy saying, there's no way in heck you're going to be raising taxes even a little scintilla on the wealthy. No, 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 no. He's not going to do that. There are many others like him, organizations and personalities, Club for Growth, Americans for Prosperity. Um, Much of the Republicans in both houses are pretty much at the beck and call and ideologically aligned, and they also donate a ton of money to their campaigns. So I think and I had a show earlier with Charles Daniels of the CWA, and we were talking about this. I think it's going to take, unfortunately, and I hate to sound negative, I'm just being realistic. It's going to take a catastrophe where you're going to have 10 cities on every corner. You can smell it, you can taste it, you can feel it. It's there every day. And that's going to push people to say, to really think when it's all over the country, that's going to push people in a certain direction. Now, you and I are reformists. We believe in the Constitution. We believe in free enterprise. We are, we like it or not, we agree with some of the very bare basics of classical liberal economics or neoliberalism, some of the basics. We just use that as a starting point, but the plot thickens along the way. There are certain rules, regulations, tax programs that you need in order to stabilize it. My concern, of course, is it going to go in a reform direction, or are people going to be captured by demagogues of a toxic populist or socialist or whatever variety, where they're going to be pushed in a direction that's very harmful for our freedoms? I don't know. I can't answer that. It's like a multiple forks in the road. But I think that's the only thing at this point that can push us. COVID really didn't do it. In fact, COVID divided the country even more, even though that was a national crisis, an international crisis. The Great Recession, well, that produced Barack Obama. And unfortunately, he did not become the next FDR. And I know this might upset some of my more conservative listeners who agree with me on Russia and China, but I voted for Obama in 2008. Thinking that he would be the next FDR, and that maybe some of his more hardcore leftist defense programs would be put in check by the Republicans. But unfortunately, he didn't become the next FDR. We know the story about that. Much has been written about. So I think it's going to take another catastrophe. But the good news is that we do exist. There's a lot of plans lying around. And I'll put Milton Friedman on his head. He had a quote where he wrote, "In capitalism and freedom, only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. That, I believe, is our basic function, to develop alternatives to existing policies, to keep them alive and available until the politically impossible becomes politically inevitable." And he took advantage and he exploited the moment.
That's been the whole basis of my career for more than 50 years. Change only occurs with crisis, a big change. Teddy Roosevelt literally took on the robber barons because of the railroads, and J.P. Morgan. That power had to be broken. The public was ready for it. Teddy was the guy to do it. Same thing with the Great Depression and the New Deal. The end of the New Deal, the Democratic Party and that movement ran out of ideas. They didn't know what to go to the next step after Vietnam, and a weak, but an honest man, Jimmy Carter, but a weak man, could not manage the federal government. I mean, the very idea that a guy locks himself for a year and a half in the White House because he won't go out because we have diplomats held hostage in Iran. So it's that change. It's that change. And we're at this point. Donald Trump's presidency is going to be useful for several reasons. The first is in his actions and the court actions, he is defining the limits of what a president can do. This is going to be bounded by court decisions and by legislation. So that's the first thing. The second thing, he has brought to the fore the trade deficit and the dependency and the cost of both the supply side economics and the neoliberal agendas. That is a major achievement. It is creating the situation for necessary change. He is doing something else with his flagrant corruption. He is going to foster a movement for honesty and integrity in government. This is by far the most corrupt president, the most corrupt administration that we've ever seen. And when you take a look, the expectations in the past were so powerful that people lived by them. You had some minor corruption. You had Joe Biden's son and his brother and a couple of other relatives doing petty crimes or petty influence peddling. You had that with H.W. Bush. You had it with George Bush. You had it with a whole series of former officials, but it was petty. It was just petty. This is industrial scale corruption, and you're having it in the cabinet, and you're having it in the Congress with inside trading of stocks, etc. Well, there's a provision in the Constitution that deals with that. It's the Emoluments Clause, and the Emoluments Clause is the backwater of the Constitution. Literally, there's never been any codifying legislation put in to define exactly how that should be punished and how it should be dealt with. It wasn't necessary. But the Emoluments Clause is very specific. It covers the executive branch. It covers the president, the vice president. It covers all presidential officials that are confirmed by the Senate, and it includes the whole of the judiciary. And so the opportunity here is to create the Honest President and Federal Office Holders Act of 2025 or 2026 or 2027 that basically defines ethics for a president, his office holders, and for the judiciary. Now, the Constitution also gives to Congress the responsibility to set those ethics for Congress itself. So we're going to wind up, I think, with a major call for ethics reform. We're dealing, in effect, with virgin territory with the Emoluments Clause. So one of the first requirements, and this was the point of my book, Agents of Influence, is you've got to have honest institutions if you're going to have honest policy. And so we're set for that. We're militarily so strong that nobody in this period of chaos is going to really threaten our freedom as such. Any dangers come from within. So we're going to have the time, and we're rich enough that we can go through the cost of 5 or 10 years to do this to get a change. Then it is the question China is going to bring to us the national focus. And Donald Trump, with his trade policies towards Japan, are whipping off the mask of China's power. And the first claw, and them pulling the glove off, is the rare earths, as we see them constrain that to us. So all in all, I am very optimistic. I mean, we have needed this chaos. We have needed this level of corruption, and we have needed this level of failure on policy to force a rethinking. The intellectual cupboards of the Republican and Democratic Party are bare at this point. This is a time for policy intellectuals and others to step up, advocate, make their points, and give alternatives. I mean, Friedman is exactly right on that. It's a great opportunity for a renewing of our economy and our democracy.
Yeah, no, I agree. Now, he was doing it to basically peddle a policy that failed, and it probably wasn't meant to really work. when you look at his ideology and those who thought like him, I mean, he was believed in this sort of economic globalism, destruction of unions, destruction of the New Deal, the American school, destruction of the American School of Economics and whatnot. And it's not just him, it's many others and many of his intellectual disciples, Walter Williams, Thomas Sowell, a number of them. I mean, there's so many of them, it's hard to keep count. I think what's going to happen is also really the permanent political exile of the neoliberals in both parties, the Economist, the Cato Institute, Club for Growth, Heritage Foundation, the New Abundance movement, Matt Yglesias coming from the Democratic side, that if we build more housing, everything's wonderful. But really, in reality, is some of the private equity people who support this abundance movement is claiming that it's more, they're blaming the unions for all the problems of the world and the country, even though private sector unions total 6% represent 6% of the workforce. And there's a lot of dishonesty. It's dishonesty, and it's going to take a major catastrophe. And then I think people will hopefully put the dots together and say, you know what they say on Fox News, it's not true. They're lying to us. What they're saying on MSNBC or what they're not saying is not true. Same thing with CNN. They're really not covering this issue all that much, or honestly, and engaging in censorship by omission. Pat, I haven't listened to CNN really, or any of those major news networks since 2008 when they fired Lou Dobbs. I go to podcasts, specialists to listen to the news. I mean, Fox News is dreadful. I don't know if you watch it much. I refuse to watch it after listening.
I sample all of them. I want to know the lines that they're putting out. So yes, I watch them, liberal, conservative, read their publications, trace it. The other thing, though, you get back to it, is the question of who owns those. Who owns those think tanks? Who puts up the money for those think tanks?
That's right.
So you go through the Koch brothers. The last time I saw an analysis, puts up $250 million a year. Here's a company that does $100 billion a year, largest privately owned company, manufacturing other company in the U.S. puts up $250 million a year, and then it rounds up a bunch of other money from other billionaires. And so they sponsor the Cato Institute, they sponsor the Heritage Foundation, Americans for Tax Reform, APC, etc. You wind up with Murdoch. He's got Fox News, he's got the Daily, he's got the Post, he's got the Wall Street Journal, and so and then he's got all of the people, the analysts out doing. So what you're seeing is a few ventriloquists that have multiple outlets to, in effect, give the appearance that this is a general. You wind up with the Koch brothers, for example, Koch Foundation. They take in a major number of our universities and they finance the economics departments. They quite literally review the work of the economist in those departments. And if their work is not satisfied, they'll cease their funding for it. And so, and the same thing is Brookings, the same thing is the American Enterprise Institute, etc. I mean, the question always is who pays. And then we come back to the question of the politicians. The most disastrous thing that's happened over the past 15 years is the Citizens United decision that permits unlimited dark money. But, you sit and think about it. There are a number of actions that you can take that are strategic. It's like Alexander cutting the Gordian knot. Actions that will release a dynamic. For example, if we take on the social media and we take, I think it's section 230, 236, and we hold the social media companies, you make them open to lawsuits and being held accountable when they're putting up false or libelous material. It would be like the newspapers who are really bound. in that sense. So that's one thing you can do. We need literally, I think at this point, to have term limits on the Supreme Court justices. I mean, each president should at least have a dynamic, and if you had an 18-year term on the Supreme Court, you need to be able to change that. And one of the things that you want to change is limit and have real transparency on our political contributions. And so that would mean doing something as simple as saying on the Federal Election Commission, which has neutered itself from the beginning by having 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats, is, and it's a majority vote to take actions, is to change the law that says that the chair will be appointed by the president, and it must be somebody that's nonpartisan, has no record for a decade of partisan activity, has been on the appellate court system. In other words, has been a federal judge, is used to judicial action, and you begin that. The whole thing is you got to control this massive amounts of money. I mean, it is absurd that Elon Musk could put $270 million into a presidential race. It now costs $7 or $8 million to run a congressional race. I mean, that's just. I've talked to candidates, and I asked them, "Where the hell do you get all this money? I mean, you're making $175,000 a year for the job. Where do you get $7 or $8 million every 2 years?" And they'll raise some of it locally, and they'll get some of it in 20 and 50 local contributions. Most of them don't know where the rest of their money comes from. Mm-hmm. I mean, basically, you'll have these groups that'll go to the super PACs, and all they care about is we want the Democrats to control Congress, we want the Republicans to control Congress. They raise in the money, they go to members and say, "Oh no, you've got to do something here to make crypto legal," because they put 150 million in last year. No. You can't do this because the oil industry. You've got to open up Alaska for drilling. They put 800 million into the race this year. So we got to control the money. We've got to have a judiciary that honestly interprets the law and that changes. We've got to have the president, the federal office holders, and the judiciary held to integrity standards, they and their families. That will go a hell of a long way in cleaning up the mess. You make those institutional changes, and then the dynamics take over to it.
Yeah, no, all good answers. Now, my last question, because we're rounding to the top of the hour, what would your tax plan look like? How should the tax code be rewritten?
Well, I would do several things. The first thing I would do is with the financial sector, I would change the code in such a way to take out the speculative, most of the speculative trading. And we saw that after Bill Clinton dropped the regulation of banks. And it was his last legislative act, he and Larry Summers. And so basically I would say, first of all, banks cannot use depositors' money, companies' money, to engage in speculative activities. That is what caused the crash in 2008. And they did it with derivatives. You go into the Comptroller General's quarterly reports and take a look at derivatives. I think it's table 22 or 23. And before that, derivatives, which is insurance, was about 10 or 15 trillion in the U.S. It surged up. It's now, I think, somewhere around 200 trillion. Let me put that in context. The insurance, the gambling, the betting on derivatives is something like 4 or 5 times the entire gross domestic product of this country. It's it's gambling. It's illegal. So the first thing I would do is I would protect depositors' money. The second thing that I would do is on the gains and speculation. At this point, they're taxed at a low capital gains rate. I would change that. I would basically say on those gains that if you do it in the short term, your taxes is 50-60%, and then let it slide to something like 10% at 10 years. In other words, you want to give them every incentive to make long-term investments, and you want in those investments them to invest it here inside the United States. It's investments that made inside the United States, and I would do things. I would give them very heavy tax incentives on R&D, on technologies that can be applied. I would go back and I would take a look at all the tax expenditures, all the loopholes that we have inside this country. And I think that fundamentally what I would do is shift from an income-based tax. I would go to a national VAT tax. You tax on what you produce. And then I have certain minimums on that. I would eliminate all taxes on Social Security, for example. Greenspan Commission in '82 created the reforms of the Social Security system, which will run out in 10 years or no. And basically, they based on that assumption that we were setting up a dynamic is that people will retire on private savings. They would do it on private pension funds, and they would do it on Social Security. Well, what we have done is we wiped out private savings with things like the Great Recession in 2008. We literally made it very difficult to save as such, in which literally you would get 1%. In some banks, you had to pay interest to the bank for them to take your money and protect it. So we've wiped out that. We've wiped out basically the defined benefits programs inside this country, which were very prevalent 50 years ago. And so what we really need to do, I think, is we need to remove the caps on Social Security, let it run, and make Social Security our primary retirement system. And it's equitable because you're putting money into that system. So the retiree is financing that system. It's taken out of your wages every paycheck and put in that. And depending upon the banks and depending upon other companies to provide private pension systems hasn't worked. I advanced the idea in the 80s and 90s of the idea of a portable pension system, that you would have a private system in which I called it, the PPP, the Portable Pension Plan, where if you made a contribution, you could set it out. The investments would be reviewed by the federal government, so there's no shysters, as there always is in the pension industry. Yes. And then you could take it from place to place to place to place. Now, I obviously was employed in several different places, and I've been in the private as a private consultant for 40 years. But so I wound up in the federal government, the state government, a couple of corporations, et cetera. And so you'd have 5 years before you invest in the system. And then you go after that, and you're getting trivial. You're getting 200 a month, or you're getting 150 a month. So the private system was based on a model it was defined in the 50s called the corporation man, the corporate guy. where you would go with an employer, you would stay with them forever. You'd have a defined contribution plan. You'd pay into it. You'd have your Social Security. You'd have your private savings, and you'd have a dignified retirement. We've set up the dynamics. If we're going to do that, we've got to modify the Social Security system and basically have a system we know that works, that we don't get into what we got into in the 80s and 90s when you had a series of companies in Wall Street literally plundered the pension plans of unions and of companies, et cetera. So that would be the thrust of the tax reforms that I'd be proposing. What we're talking about now is just simply shifting wealth from one part of the society to the other. This is wealth transfers.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really the essence of neoliberalism, was a wealth transfer from the middle and the bottom to the very tippy top of financialized capitalism. And
it happened over 40 years.
It did. And there was a famous RAND study from maybe 2020 or maybe it was 2018, a RAND Corporation study, which outlined this and gave the reasons.
Yeah.
Deregulation, union busting, and the supply side, or if you want to call it trickle-down tax policies, and also free trade too, and deunionization, which I think I just said. So there you go. And this was a transfer in, I think, even in the trillions of dollars, if I recall correctly.
Yes.
Let me see if I could find the statistic before we go. I'll have to find it in my essay here to find the statistic, but it's just absolutely incredible. And this is Rand Corporation. It's not some socialist outfit.
No, it's first-rate independent. It truly is. But the message here is there are very specific things that we can do. And there's a limited number we have to do, and they're politically feasible to do, that will right the ship.
That's correct. There's a lot of solutions. The solutions are laying around, and hopefully we will get more Democrats and Republicans that will somehow, by the force of history or circumstance, will break away from this model of politics and economics to what we are advocating. And before we go, and before concluding remarks, the Rand Corporation study revealed, this was from one of my essays on my Substack, it revealed that the true cost of income inequality for average Americans, the 90%, was 2.5 trillion with a T per year during the period from 1975 to 2018. This amount of money was redistributed from the bottom 90% to the top 1%. The grand total of money literally stolen, these are my words, from the 90% total, approximately $50 trillion. The study found the situation was a result of supply-side economic policies such as financial deregulation, tax cuts for the wealthy, and wage suppression. According to the study, if the capitalist system was properly balanced and regulated, the annual pay for Americans would be $48,000 and $63,000 higher per year. In other words, that worker would be making $92,000 to $102,000 per year. Rand found that full-time prime-age workers in the 25th percentile of the American income distribution would be making $61,000 instead of $33,000. Had everyone's earnings from 1975 to 2018 expanded roughly in line with the gross domestic product, GDP, as they did during the 1950s and 1960s. And I could go on and on. This is in my Substack, What is Radical Civic Nationalism? The statistics aren't here. I think we get the picture.
Yes. One of the first things that we've got to do is we got to take the dark money out.
Yes.
We have to have our president, our federal office holders, our judiciary, and our Congress work for us. That cannot be bought.
Exactly. No question about it. Pat, it's been an absolute pleasure. I think we covered a lot of ground on supply side tax policy, economic policy, campaign finance, as usual. Great discussion. And do you have any concluding remarks? And where can people find your books and other work?
Well, my recommendation on my books is go to Amazon and buy a used copy. It'll save you. You can buy them for $1 or $2.
Pat, it's always a pleasure to have you. It's been fun. Great policy discussions. Keep up the good work with our elected officials, the projects you work with. And you're doing God's work. That's all I have to say.
Fun. So are you, Nevin. So are you.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Have a
Thank
great
you all. God bless America. Be good to each other. Be safe. Enjoy the weekend.